A racist doctor named Henry refuses to treat a black woman because he thinks that her swollen stomach is nothing serious. A few days later, something happens that he never expected. The woman he declined to treat actually has a life-threatening condition. Will he find the courage to make things right? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Dr. Henry Hart rode through the hospital hallways on his bike. His white coat was clean, and he stood up straight. The glossy sound of his shoes hitting the walls let everyone know he was there before he even walked in. With eyes that were a mix of fear and respect, nurses and younger doctors quickly moved out of his way. People knew Henry as one of the best doctors in the country because his hands were steady and his mind was sharp. People from all over the world came to him for help, and his co-workers were amazed by his skills. Dr. Hart was very successful at work, but there was another side to him that people didn't know about. He took a quick look at the chart in his hand as he walked toward the exam room. He made a small sneer with his lips when he saw the name of the patient, Jessica Johnson. He took a deep breath and went to do something that he thought was a waste of his time. When Henry opened the door, the black woman sitting on the exam table caught his attention right away. Her eyes were full of fear and hope, and her hands were tightly clasped in her lap. But Henry didn't see any of that. All he saw was someone he didn't think was worth his time or skills. "Mrs. Johnson," he asked in a cold and short voice, "what seems to be the matter today?" Jessica started to talk about her symptoms, and her voice started to shake a little. "Doctor, my stomach has been hurting really badly. I'm very worried because they've been getting worse." Henry took a quick look at her chart and didn't pay much attention. He had already made up his mind. He stopped her in the middle of a speech. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm sure it's not something serious, most likely just stomach pain or menstrual cramps. Have you looked into over-the-counter painkillers?" It was sad for Jessica that her dreams for a thorough exam had been dashed. "But this time, doctor, it feels different. This pain is the worst I've ever felt." Henry sighed, and it was clear that he was impatient. "Mrs. Johnson, I promise you that you would know if it was something important. Rest and take some painkillers. If it doesn't go away, see your regular doctor." Henry didn't wait for an answer before turning around and walking out the door. He had to see more important cases, ones that he thought really needed his help. The look of sadness and fear on Jessica's face as he left was missed. Jessica went back to the clinic the next day, her face marked with pain and stress. She put her hand on her swollen stomach, which could be seen through her loose shirt. She had a hard time walking, and every step hurt. When she walked into Dr. Hart's office, Henry looked up from his desk with a mad look on his face. "Mrs. Johnson, really? Back so soon?" He said it with a sarcastic tone of voice. She sat down slowly in the chair, taking short gasps of air. "Dr. Hart, I need your help. The pain is much worse today, and my stomach is swollen. It doesn't seem right." Crossing his arms, Henry leaned back in his chair and looked at Jessica with narrowed eyes. He wasn't worried, he thought she was stupid. "Mrs. Johnson, didn't I tell you yesterday that it wasn't a big deal? Are you here to get help or painkillers?" Jessica's eyes got teary. "No, doctor, I'm scared. This is not like me at all." Henry stood up quickly, making noise as his chair hit the floor. "Listen up, Mrs. Johnson. I've seen people like you before. After hearing about your past, I'm sure you're not used to getting good medical care. But that doesn't mean you can bother me with every little ache and pain." Jessica jerked back when he spoke, and his hard gaze made her feel small and unimportant. She tried again, but this time, her voice was almost a whisper. "But doctor, just take a look," Henry told her. "Enough. Stop making things sound worse, and take some more painkillers. Someone with a real problem needs my help right now." Jessica slouched her shoulders in failure. She got up slowly, wiping away a tear with one hand as she walked slowly to the door. The other hand was on her swollen stomach. Henry's voice came after her. Mrs. Johnson, try not to be so dramatic next time. It's not appropriate. With a soft click, the door shut behind Jessica. She stood in the hallway, embarrassed and down in the dumps. There was a lot of pain in her stomach, which kept reminding her of being fired. Jessica walked out of the clinic with a heavy heart and even heavier steps. She wasn't sure what she was going to do next. "Dad, I'm home," Rose yelled as she rushed through the front door with her backpack flying all over the place. Her voice could be heard in the hallway of their large suburban home. Henry came out of his study with a tired smile on his face. "Hello, sweetheart. How was your day at school?" The excitement in Rose's eyes lit up as she began to talk about her day. "Wow, Dad, that was great. For our science project, Cynthia and I are going to build a model of the solar system together." Henry just nodded, his mind still on the cases he had seen that day. "That's nice, sweetheart. Who is Cynthia again?" Rose rolled her eyes and said, "Dad, I've told you about Cynthia a million times. She is my best friend." Henry laughed and ruffled Rose's hair. She kept talking excitedly as they went into the kitchen. Of course, I remember now. Dad, Cynthia's mom is really cool. She helps us with our projects even though she has 2 jobs. She even said she could paint our worlds with us." Henry raised an eyebrow, becoming interested. "Is that true?" Rose gave an excited nod. "Yes, Mrs. Johnson is great. She's always calm and helpful, even when she seems very tired. As of late, Cynthia's mom hasn't been feeling well, but she still finds time for everyone." Henry had a nagging feeling in his chest. Was it guilt? He quickly ignored it. "Well, that's very brave of her," he said in a calm voice. Rose agreed, her voice full of warmth. "Yes, Dad, it really is. Mrs. Jones is really strong. Cynthia told me that her mom always has a smile on her face, even when things are hard. She says her mom told her that being kind doesn't cost anything." Henry heard, but his face couldn't be read. He had no idea that the woman his daughter was really admiring was the same one he had turned down at the clinic. He didn't see the irony in what was going on. Henry said, in a soft voice, more to himself than to Rose, "That's a good lesson." Rose gave her dad a big smile. "Yes, I agree. Hey, Dad, do you think Cynthia and her mom could come over sometime? You should meet them." Henry thought about it for a moment before he forced a smile. "Okay, honey, let's see. Go do your homework now." Rose ran off to her room, and Henry stood in the kitchen, thinking. In his mind, the woman he had rudely ignored at the clinic came back to him. But he couldn't connect her to the kind, strong mother his daughter had just talked about. Jessica's situation got steadily worse over the course of the days. The pain in her stomach got worse, and it got harder for her to hide how uncomfortable she was from Cynthia. She dragged herself out of bed every morning, suffering as she did it, determined to do what she had to do that day. "Mom, are you all right?" Cynthia asked one morning, her big brown eyes full of worry. Even though Jessica tried to smile, it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, honey. I'm just a little tired, that's all." But the truth was anything but okay. Jessica's body hurt, and she had a steady, sharp pain that got worse every day. She kept going, though, because she didn't want her daughter to see how hard it was for her. Jessica became more likely to take breaks at work and lean against walls for support when the pain got too much. Her co-workers noticed how pale she was and how often she had sweaty beads on her forehead, but Jessica just smiled and waved them off. She would say, "I'm fine," while holding onto the edge of her desk to keep herself steady. One night as she was making dinner, she felt a sharp pain in her stomach that made her drop a plate. Cynthia ran into the kitchen when she heard the sound of it breaking on the floor. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Cynthia cried when she saw her mother in so much pain. Jessica quickly stood up straight and tried to laugh. "I'm sorry, I dropped a plate. Please get the broom for me, sweetheart." Cynthia thought for a moment, looking at her mother's face. Are you sure you're okay? Jessica lied. Of course, honey. The worry in her daughter's words broke her heart. Now do your homework while I clean up this mess. By late that night, Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands over her head. Cynthia had already gone to bed. She was sure she needed medical help, but the thought of going back to Dr. Hart's office scared her. It hurt her to think about how his rude comments and assumptions hurt her, and they made her cry. She told him in a whisper, "Can't go back there." Her voice was choked with sadness. "I just can't," Jessica said, but as another wave of pain hit her, she knew she had no choice but to give up. But she couldn't get help because she was afraid of Dr. Hart again. Jessica felt more hopeless and alone than ever before, because her health was getting worse and her pride was hurt. Over the next few days, Jessica's health kept getting worse. She did everything she could to hide her pain from Cynthia and her coworkers. But it was getting harder and harder. Her face was pale and drawn as she struggled through each job at work. She moved more slowly. At Jessica's job, the diner where she worked was very busy one morning, and she felt a sharp, killing pain in her belly. She gasped and grabbed the counter to steady herself. Jenny, also at work, ran over to her right away. "Jessica, are you okay?" Jenny asked, her voice full of worry. Jessica opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. The room started to spin, and she had trouble seeing. She could feel her knees giving out. "Grazia!" Jenny screamed as Jessica fell to the ground, while Jessica's coworkers rushed to her side. Customers gasped and stood up, making the diner a sea of chaos. Jenny got on her knees next to her and gently rubbed her cheek. "Jessica, can you hear me?" she called, but Jessica's eyes were still closed. "Can someone call an ambulance?" the diner manager yelled. In just a few minutes, alarms could be heard everywhere. When paramedics rushed through the diner doors, they quickly checked on Jessica. They carefully put her on a stretcher and rushed her to the ambulance that was waiting. A lot of doctors and nurses crowded around Jessica in the emergency room of the hospital. They drew blood, did tests, and did scans. As the medical team looked over the results, their faces turned more serious. The lead doctor, Dr. Croft Chen, frowned as she looked over Jessica's charts. "This is a lot worse than we thought at first," she told her team in a low voice. "We need to admit her right away and get ready for emergency care," they said. Jessica briefly woke up as she was wheeled to the intensive care unit. Fear and confusion filled her eyes. Flew open. "Cynthia," she said in a weak voice, "my daughter." A nurse with a friendly face squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, we'll get in touch with your family. Now you're in good hands." At this point, Jessica's eyes closed again as the medical staff kept working quickly to save her life. In the hospital, Henry was making his rounds when Dr. Chen came up to him with a worried look on her face. "Dr. Hart, I need your help with a very important case," she said in a frantic tone. Henry sighed and looked up from his clipboard only briefly. "What is it, Dr. Chen?" "I have a lot to do. That person is a woman named Jessica. She was admitted because her stomach hurt a lot and was swollen. We think it could be a complicated case that needs your help." Henry's eyes raised a little. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "Who is Jessica?" he asked, but his tone was rude. Dr. Chen looked over her notes. "Grace Johnson. Her situation is getting worse quickly, and we're worried about what might happen next." Henry's thoughts went back to the woman he had turned away from his clinic. His face showed a hint of pain, but he quickly covered it up. It was a cold, "I see" from him. "And just why do you need my opinion?" At that moment, a nurse ran up to them, her eyes wide with worry. "Dr. Chen, the person in room 305 wants to talk to her daughter. She's in a lot of pain." Dr. Chen said, "Yes. That is Jessica. Cynthia is the name of her daughter. We are now trying to get in touch with her." When Cynthia's name was said, Henry stopped moving. Cynthia, his daughter Rose's best friend, and the kind, strong mother Rose had praised, was Jessica. This hit him like a ton of rocks and made his heart race. Henry felt like he was going to throw up. His fingers turned white as he held on tight to his clipboard. He felt like he was going to lose it because he had been rejected and treated badly before. Both Dr. Chen and the nurse looked at him eagerly, waiting for him to speak. It was hard for Henry to keep a straight face as he took a big breath. It was too painful for him to let his coworkers see how upset he was. He carefully kept his voice down and said, "I'll look over her case. Send me everything I need to know, and I'll see what I can do." Dr. Chen nodded, and her face showed that she was relieved. "Thank you, Dr. Hart. We value your help with this." Even as they walked away, Henry stood still, his mind racing. He started to understand how bad his actions were and what might happen as a result. This made him feel empty and guilty. Rose rushed into the house with a worried look on her face. What did she find? Her dad, Henry, was sitting in his office and staring at his computer screen. "Dad," she cried out, her voice shaking. A terrible thing took place. Henry looked up when he heard his daughter crying out in pain. "Rose, what is it? What's wrong?" Rose had tears in her eyes. "Hi, this is Jessica, Cynthia's mom. It's really bad that she's in the hospital. Cynthia is really scared, Dad. She has no idea what to do." Henry's stomach started to hurt. He tried to keep a calm expression on his face, but his heart was beating fast as he thought about the first time he met Jessica. His voice was rough as he said, "That's too bad. I'm sure the hospital staff is taking good care of her." Rose shook her head, and her anger was clear in her eyes. "Dad, you don't get it. Jessica is great. She's taken care of Cynthia so well by herself. Did you know that she has 2 jobs to make sure Cynthia has everything she needs?" Henry moved around in his chair in an uncomfortable way. He said, "I didn't know that. And she's always there for everyone," Rose said, with admiration in her voice. "She cooked meals for Mrs. Rodriguez's whole family. Last month when she was sick. Dad, she's really nice. She doesn't deserve this." Henry could feel a weight building in his chest as Rose talked. The picture he had made in his mind of Jessica started to fall apart. And a mother who worked hard and didn't care about herself took its place. Em said softly, as she wiped away a tear, "Cynthia once told me that her mom skips meals sometimes so she can afford Cynthia's school supplies. But she never says anything bad. No matter how bad things get, she always has a smile on her face." Henry forced a deep breath in and out as the feeling of guilt rose in his throat. He remembered how rude he had been to Jessica and how he had judged her based on how she looked and where she came from. Henry said, "I'm sure she'll be fine," but his voice didn't sound fully assured. "The hospital has excellent doctors," Rose begged her father with her eyes as she looked at him. "Can't you do something, Dad? You're a great doctor. Maybe you could help." Henry felt a little scared. He wanted to help and make things right, but he couldn't because he felt bad about what he had done before. He tried to ignore how he felt and explain his actions, but Rose's words kept playing over and over in his thoughts. He finally said, I'll see what I can find out," but he couldn't look his daughter in the eyes. Henry walked into the hospital meeting room with fear in his steps. The doctors who were taking care of Jessica were already gathering around the table, their faces serious as they looked through her records. Dr. Hart, one of the doctors, said hello to him. "Thank you for joining us. We'd like your input on this case." Henry gave a stiff nod and sat down at the table. It was a little hard for him to hold Jessica's medical file while he opened it. His heart sank as he looked through the pages. The pain, the tiredness, and the swollen belly were all there, as clear as day. These were all signs that he had ignored when Jessica came to his clinic. "Patient came in with severe abdominal pain and distension," said another doctor. CT scan revealed a large tumor in her ovary with signs of metastasis. Henry could feel his face losing blood. He remembered Jessica begging for help while sitting in his office. Her face was red from pain. He had only waved her off and said something mean before sending her off. Henry's voice broke as he asked, "How?" He shook his head and tried again. "How advanced is it?" One of the top oncologists shook her head. Stage 3. If it had been caught earlier, her prognosis would have been much better. As it stands now, we're looking at aggressive treatment just to give her a fighting chance. Henry felt like he was hit hard by the words. He did this because of his bias, his pride, and the fact that he was a terrible doctor. Everything had led to this point. He took an oath to not hurt anyone, but his carelessness almost killed Jessica. One of the younger doctors, Dr. Hart, was looking at him with worry. "Are you all right?" Henry saw that he had been shaking his hands and looking blankly at the file. He saw that the team was confused and worried when he looked up at them. These people didn't know what he was up to or how guilty he felt. He began, but stopped. What could he say? How could he possibly explain or defend what he did? Henry took a deep breath to calm down. He said, "I'd like to take on this case myself," and his voice was stronger than he felt. The room went quiet. Henry Hart, who is known for only taking on certain patients, volunteered to help someone he would normally avoid. It was never done before. The lead physician raised an eyebrow and asked, "Are you sure, Dr. Hart? We have several other specialists who—" Henry may have cut her off too quickly. A softer tone came from him. I believe I'm the best equipped to handle this case." His co-workers looked at each other and nodded to show they agreed. Henry was, after all, the best surgeon in the world. After the meeting was over, Henry stayed, sat, and looked at Jessica's file. The woman's face that he had rudely turned away from now kept coming back to haunt him. He could see the pain and hopelessness in her eyes as she begged for help in silence. He was torn inside. Years of bias fought against the harsh truth that he had failed as a doctor. He made bad decisions because of his own views. And now a mother was fighting for her life because of it. He told himself over and over, this isn't about race, to try to change his mind. This is about being a doctor, about saving a life. As Henry left the conference room, he realized that the hospital staff were looking at him with interest. People already knew about his strange choice to take on Jessica's case. He could see and hear the eyebrows being raised. In the hallway, Dr. Martin, a co-worker with whom he often worked together, came up to him. "Henry, are you feeling all right? It's not like you to." With a short nod, Henry cut him off. "I'm fine, thank you, just doing my job." He wasn't okay, though. He felt more guilty with each step he took toward Jessica's room. He couldn't look at her. He had failed so badly with that woman. How could he look into her eyes? Henry stopped as he reached for the door handle. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and told himself and Jessica in his head that he would do everything he could to fix things. Henry stood outside of Jessica's hospital room for a moment, his hand still on the doorknob. Inside him, he could hear soft voices. They were young, but worried voices. He took a deep breath and opened the door. Two girls, holding hands, sat next to Jessica's bed. One was his daughter Rose, who had tears in her eyes. The other girl, a young African-American girl, had to be Jessica's daughter, Cynthia. "Dad," Rose said, when she looked up and saw him. Henry blew his nose. "Hello, girls. I wanted to check on the patient." Cynthia's eyes got bigger. She asked in a shaking voice, "Are you Mom's doctor?" Henry nodded, but he couldn't look her in the eyes. "I am, and I promise you we're doing everything we can for her." Cynthia's lip shook. "She's always taking care of me. Even when she was sick, she never stopped. She'd make my lunch, help me with homework." She spoke softly. "I should have known something was wrong." Rose gave her friend a squeeze on the hand. "Your mom's the bravest person I know, Cynthia. Remember when she helped us with the bake sale? She stayed up all night making cupcakes, even though she had work the next day." Henry listened with a lump in his throat. He had brushed Jessica off so quickly because he only saw her as a stereotype. But this woman put her child first and went through pain to do it. Cynthia said in a soft voice, "She never complains. Even when things are hard, she always says, 'We have so much to be thankful for.'" Henry felt bad about himself all at once. That was so wrong of him. Jessica was more than just a patient for these girls. She was like a mother, a friend, and a rock of strength. Henry said, with a heavy heart, "Your mother sounds like an amazing woman. I'm sorry she's going through this." The girls looked at him with eyes filled with tears and hope. Henry made a promise in his mind at that very moment. He would do everything he could to save Jessica. As a doctor and as a person who had finally learned how important it is to care about others, Henry stayed by Jessica's bedside and watched her chest move up and down with each hard breath. The steady sound of the heart monitor filled the room, and kept calling to mind how close they were to losing her. He couldn't get rid of the picture of their first meeting or the hard words he had said. He had said, "You people always exaggerate," and his voice was full of contempt. "I'm sure it's nothing serious." A wave of shame went through Henry as he looked at Jessica's pale face. How could he have been so cruel and blind? He didn't make good decisions because of his bias, and this woman almost died because of it. Henry sank into the chair next to her bed and put his hands over his face. Cynthia and Rose's faces were full of fear and love for Jessica as he thought of them. Gracie had worked through a lot of pain to help other people, and she never once complained. He said, "I'm so sorry," but he knew Jessica couldn't hear him. "I was wrong, so terribly wrong." Henry made a promise to himself as he sat there. He was going to do everything he could to fix this. He had to change into the doctor and person he should have been all along, not just into someone who could save Jessica's life. Henry got up, and it looked like he was ready to do something. He went to the nurse's station and asked for Jessica's full medical background and all of her most recent test results. He would look over everything, talk to experts if needed, and make sure she got the best care possible. Henry felt something changing inside him as he looked over her charts. He had built up walls of bias over many years, but they started to fall down. Jessica wasn't just a stereotype to him. She was a real person who was strong, loving, and worthy of respect. Henry told himself, "I'll make this right. For Jessica, for Cynthia, and for every patient I've ever misjudged." After taking a deep breath, Henry called the medical team together in the meeting room. It was very bright in the hospital, and the doctors and nurses, who had been working hard on Jessica's case, looked very tired. Henry stood at the head of the table with a determined look on his face, instead of his normal air of superiority. "All right, everyone," he said, in a calm but strong voice. "We need to give Jessica our absolute best. Let's go over her case from the beginning." They spent hours going over Jessica's medical history, test results, and present health. Henry paid close attention to what everyone on the team said, asking questions and starting conversations. People who worked with him had never seen that side of him before. She was surprised when one of the younger doctors, Dr. Hart, said, "I've never seen you so invested in a patient before." Henry stopped and his eyes got softer. "This case has made me think about a lot of things," he said. "We can't afford to make any mistakes." The more time that went by, the more famous Henry's care for Jessica became. In the hospital, it was common for him to check on her late at night, make changes to her treatment plan, and talk to doctors from all over the country. A nurse came up to Henry one evening as he was sitting next to Jessica's bed and reading her most recent blood results. She told him in a soft voice, "Dr. Hart, you need to rest at home. You've been here for almost 48 hours straight." Henry shook his head and never took his eyes off the chart he was holding. "I can't leave yet. There's still so much to do." He felt a hand on his shoulder from the nurse. "You're doing everything you can, doctor. Jessica is in good hands." Henry finally looked up. He felt both determined and sorry in his eyes. "I owe her this," he said, in a low voice. "I owe her so much more than this." Henry felt like he had a new purpose when he turned back to Jessica's sleeping form. He was no longer just fighting to save Jessica's life. He was fighting for a chance to change, to become the doctor and person he should have been all along. As Henry's commitment to Jessica's case grew, rumors started to spread among the hospital staff. People who worked with him and were used to his distant and often rude attitude couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. In the break room, Dr. Mary Fields, another surgeon, went up to Dr. James Miller. She asked in a low voice, "Have you seen Henry lately? He looks like a different person." Dr. Miller nodded and carefully stirred his coffee. "It's strange, isn't it? I've never seen him so invested in a patient before. Do you think it has something to do with his daughter?" She asked out loud. "I heard that the patient's daughter is friends with Rose." James gave a sigh. "Could be. It's hard to imagine." Henry suddenly developing a conscience after all these years. Their conversation was cut short when Dr. Lisa Chen walked in and heard what they were saying. "I don't know," she added, as she joined them. "I've been working closely with Henry on Jessica's case, and it seems genuine to me. He's been pulling all-nighters, consulting with specialists. I've never seen him work so hard." Mary was still not sure. "Maybe he's just trying to save face. You know how important his reputation is to him." As the days went by, the rumors kept going. Some staff members admired Henry's growing commitment, while others didn't understand why he was doing it. But Henry didn't seem to notice the rumors going around about him. His only concern was Jessica's health. As Henry was leaving Jessica's room one night after a regular check, he heard two nurses talking quietly. One nurse said in a whisper, "I bet he's only doing this because of his daughter's friend. It's not like him to care about patients like this." Henry stopped and put his hand on the doorknob. He felt a little angry for a moment at their assumptions. But then he thought about how he had behaved in the past, and realized he couldn't blame them for having questions. With a calm voice, Henry pushed his white coat back into place and walked past the nurses, giving them a polite nod. He wasn't interested in what other people thought. Jessica's life was in danger, and he was going to do everything he could to defend her. Henry got home late one night after a long day at the hospital. Stella was already there, waiting for him in the kitchen. While the warm smell of a home-cooked lunch filled the air, Henry's thoughts were still on Jessica's case. "Henry, honey," Stella said softly, as she put her hand on his arm. "You've been so distant lately. What's going on?" As Henry sat down in a chair at the kitchen table, he let out a sigh and let his shoulders fall. He told Stella, I've made a terrible mistake," his voice barely above a whisper. Stella sat down next to him and looked worried as she did so. "What do you mean?" Henry took a deep breath and started to talk about everything. How he had initially brushed Jessica off, how his bias had made it hard for him to make good decisions, and how his guilt was now taking over him. His voice was shaking with feeling as he talked. He said, "I could have killed her," his eyes shining with tears that wouldn't fall. "And for what? Because of my own stupid biases." Stella listened carefully while putting her hand on Henry's to feel better. She gave him a light squeeze on the hand when he was done. "Oh, Henry," she said, in a low voice. "I'm so proud of you for recognizing your mistake and trying to make it right." Henry was shocked when he saw her. "You're not disappointed in me?" Stella turned her head away. "We all make mistakes, Henry. What matters is how we choose to learn from them and grow. You're doing the right thing now, and that's what's important." Her words made Henry feel like he had less stress. I want to do better," he said. "Not just for Jessica, but for all my patients." Stella gave a warm smile. "That's the Henry I married," she told me. "The compassionate doctor who wanted to help people. Remember why you became a surgeon in the first place?" Henry said, "Yes," and a small smile crept across his face. "To save lives and make a difference." Exactly, Stella answered. And that's what you're doing now. Don't let anyone's doubts, including your own, stop you from doing what's right. Because the days went by, Jessica's health started to get better. Her vital signs stabilized, and the swelling in her belly went down. Henry stayed by her bedside for hours on end, carefully watching her progress and making changes to her treatment plan as required. One afternoon, Jessica was slowly waking up when she opened her eyes and saw Henry checking her phone. She blinked in surprise when she realized it was the same doctor who had laughed off her worries before. "Dr. Hart," she said, in a weak voice that was full of shock. Henry looked at her, and his face became softer with happiness. "Jessica, you're awake. How are you feeling?" Jessica didn't know what to say and paused. Although the memory of the last time they met still hurt, there was something different about Henry now. She had never seen him look so warm in the eyes before. "I think I'm better," she said slowly. "But why are you here?" Henry took a deep breath and let his shoulders hang a little. "Jessica, I owe you an apology. My behavior during your clinic visit was inexcusable. I've been overseeing your care since you were admitted, and I promise you I'm doing everything in my power to help you recover." Jessica looked at his face, trying to find any sign that he wasn't telling the truth. To her surprise, she only found deep regret and worry. She said in a soft voice, "I don't get it. What went wrong?" Henry sat down in a chair next to her bed. His voice was full of emotion as he said, "I realized how wrong I was. What I thought was right was wrong, and I almost killed you because of it. Gail, I'm really sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I want you to get better." Her eyes were filled with tears. She never thought the cocky doctor she had met would say something like that. She felt a spark of faith form as she watched Henry carefully move her pillows and check her vital signs. "Thank you, Dr. Hart," she said, in a deep voice that showed how she felt. "Thank you for being honest and caring." Henry gave a soft smile, and comfort spread across his face. He said in a soft voice, "You can call me Henry. Thank you for giving me a chance to make things right, Jessica." As Jessica took a break, Henry left her room, his mind full of ideas about how to make things better and change. Rose was waiting for him in the hallway. Her young face was filled with worry. Rose asked her dad in a soft voice, "Can we talk?" Henry smiled and led her to a quiet area of the hospital cafeteria. As they sat down, Rose took a big breath and looked at her dad. Rose started to talk, her voice shaking a little. "Dad, I know how you treated Cynthia's mom before. Cynthia told me everything." Henry felt bad about himself. He looked down because he couldn't meet his daughter's eyes. Rose softly spoke up and said, "Dad, please listen. I know you want to make things right now, but please understand something important." Henry looked up and saw that his daughter's eyes were filled with purpose. He gave her a nod, telling her to keep going. Rose's voice got louder as she said, "A doctor's job is to help everyone. It does not matter where they are from or how they look. It is your job to treat everyone the same, without bias." What she said hit Henry hard in the gut. While he had always been proud of being a great surgeon, he now saw that he had been failing at the most important part of his job. Henry said, "You're right, Rose," but his voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been wrong for a long time." Rose put out her hand and grabbed her dad's. "Dad, it's still possible to change. You're beginning to already. Today, I saw how hard you worked to help Mrs. Johnson." Henry squeezed his daughter's hand, feeling both ashamed and proud. He was ashamed of what he had done in the past, but proud of how wise and kind his daughter was. "This is what Henry told Rose, I promise you." His voice was strong with purpose. "I'm going to do better for all of my patients, not just Jessica. Too long have I not seen my own biases." She smiled, and tears were shining in her eyes. "Dad, that's all I wanted to hear. I'm sure you can be a great doctor who changes people's lives." As they sat there together, hand in hand, Henry felt a big change inside him. The things his daughter said touched him deeply and made him realize what his job as a doctor was really all about. He knew this talk would change his life in many ways, including at work and in his home life. When Henry left the restaurant, Rose's words kept playing over and over in his mind as he walked through the hospital halls. He could feel the weight of what he had done in the past pressing down on him. He stopped by a window and looked out at the busy city below. His image looked back at him with scary eyes. How many people did he turn down over the years? He could have changed so many lives if he had just let go of his biases. He kept thinking about the questions, and each one made him feel bad about what he had done wrong. He thought about Jessica, who was fighting for her life in the hospital bed. If he had taken her seriously from the start, she might not be where she is now. He felt terrible when he realized what he had done. Henry closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. He saw the faces of many people who had been treated with contempt or lack of care. Even though he was rude, he helped some people, but he turned away or gave them bad care to others. Every face showed that he had failed as a doctor and as a person. Henry opened his eyes and straightened his back. He understood what he needed to do. It wasn't enough to just help Jessica. It was the start. He had to change more than just how he treated patients. The hospital as a whole had to change too. Henry walked toward his office with more purpose than before. He would start by going over his old cases and getting in touch with people he had hurt. It would be painful and humiliating, but it had to be done. People who got the care they needed would get free follow-up care from him. That was enough, though. Henry knew he had to fix the problems that were happening all over the hospital. He would like all staff to get training in diversity, push for more open hiring practices, and support outreach programs in areas that aren't getting enough help. Henry began making a plan while he was sitting at his desk. It was going to be a long and hard trip, but he was determined to finish it. He owed it to Jessica, Rose, and all the patients he had ever let down. As Henry walked up to the hospital room where Cynthia was waiting, he took a big breath. He had talked to kids before, but this felt different. Because of his past mistakes and how bad Jessica's situation was. This conversation was very important. He walked into the room and saw Cynthia sitting on a chair with her little legs hanging off the edge. She had tears in her eyes, but she looked up at him with hope in her eyes. Henry said softly, "Hello, Cynthia," getting down on his knees to talk to her. "My name is Dr. Hart. I'm taking care of your mom." Cynthia nodded, and her bottom lip shook a little. "Will my mom be all right?" Henry had a sore throat. He reached out and took Cynthia's hand with care. "Cynthia, please know that I'm on top of things to help your mom. She's really sick, but she's also really strong." Cynthia's eyes got bigger. "Really? You say you'll do everything, right?" "Everything," Henry said, with a serious nod. "I promise. I'm working with a group of doctors to get your mom better. She is getting the best care possible." Cynthia's face began to shine a little more. "Thank you, Dr. Hart. My mom says that doctors are like superheroes all the time. When people are sick, they make them feel better." Henry felt a pain in his chest when Cynthia said those kind words. He wasn't even close to being a superhero before, but he was determined to become one now. "Cynthia, your mom is right. We try our best to help people, and I promise to do the same for your mom." Henry was shocked when Cynthia threw her arms around his neck and hugged him tightly. She said in a whisper, "Thank you. I'm sure you can help her." Henry was touched by the trust this little girl was putting in him as he hugged her back. He was moved deeply by her faith in his skills and her unshakable hope that he would save her mother. Henry saw hope in Cynthia's eyes that hadn't been there before when she pulled away. He felt a new sense of purpose and drive. After that, he said, with tears in his voice, "Cynthia, I promise that I will do everything I can to help your mom get better. Let's fight this together, all right?" Cynthia said yes, and a small smile showed on her face. "All right, Dr. Hart. I have faith in you." As the days went by, Henry spent more and more time next to Jessica's bedside. He carefully watched her growth and made changes to her treatment plan as needed. Grace's health started to get better slowly but surely. Henry was checking on Jessica one afternoon when she moved and opened her eyes. "Dr. Hart," she said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Henry gave a soft smile. "How do you feel today, Jessica?" "A little better," she said. "Thank you for looking after me." Henry felt a little guilty when she thanked him. "It was his job," he said in a soft voice. "I'm sorry I did it wrong the first time." And Jessica looked at him with eyes that were both interested and wise. "Dr. Hart, we all mess up sometimes. The important thing is what we learn from them." Henry was deeply moved by what she said. He sat down in a chair next to her bed. "Jessica, could you tell me more about yourself? About your life?" As Jessica got better over the next few days, she told Henry her story. She told him how hard it was to be a single mom and how she grew up in a poor area. She also talked about her hopes for Cynthia's future. Henry listened carefully, and with each new detail, his heart grew heavy. As time went on, he stopped seeing Jessica as just a patient, and started seeing her as a strong woman who had beaten all chances. Jessica once said, "You know, I always thought that everyone should get a second chance. It's important to get back up after being knocked down by life." Henry said yes, and his eyes got wet. "Jessica, you are a very strong person. I admire your strength." When Henry and Jessica talked, he grew to respect Jessica a lot. Even though she had been through a lot, her kindness made him feel small. He saw how unfair and narrow-minded his first opinion had been. Jessica's health got better every day, and Henry learned more about her life as time went on. He changed in ways he never thought possible as he saw the world through her eyes. As Jessica's health continued to get better, Henry spent more time thinking about the big changes he had been through. He was in his office late one night and looked out the window at the city lights. His mind was full of thoughts and feelings. He remembered how, the first time Jessica came to his office, he had not cared about her problems at all. He felt a sharp pang of sorrow in his heart when he thought about it. But now that he thought about Jessica's face, he saw more than just a patient. He saw a strong, tough woman who had handled many problems with grace and drive. Henry closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He thought about the talks they had had about Jessica's problems and successes, her hopes and fears, over the past few weeks. With each story, the prejudiced walls he had made around himself were broken down, revealing the humanity that bound them all. With a shake of his head, Henry said to himself, "I've been so blind." He got up, walked over to the window, and put his cool face against the glass. At that very moment, Henry promised himself and Jessica in silence. Afterward, he promised to use what he had learned to treat every patient with the respect and honor they deserved, no matter who they were or what their situation was. "Don't judge anymore," he said, in a low voice. "Cut out the assumptions." As soon as Henry made this promise, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He became aware that by helping Jessica get better, he had also started to get better himself. The biases that seemed so ingrained at first now seemed strange and wrong. Henry saw a framed picture of his daughter Rose when he went back to his desk. He picked it up with a smile as he thought about what she had said, about how a doctor should treat everyone the same. She had such a clear view of the truth, while he was lost in his own opinions. He put the picture down gently and said, "Thank you, Rose. Thank you also, Jessica." As the day Jessica was to be released from the hospital came, Henry was both excited and nervous. She was finally ready to go home after weeks of being cared for by him. He wanted to make sure that everything was just right so that she could keep getting better. Henry walked into Jessica's hospital room with the clipboard in his hand. Jessica was sitting on the edge of her bed with a small smile on her face. She was wearing clothes that were pleasant to touch. Henry greeted Jessica with a warm, "Good morning." Are you ready to go home? Jessica said yes, and her eyes were shining with excitement. More than ready, Dr. Hart. I can't wait to see Cynthia. Henry's heart grew when Jessica's daughter was brought up. He had grown to respect the bond between a mom and her kid. Before you leave, Henry said, I want to go over your discharge instructions. He then pulled up a chair. He sat down and made sure Jessica could see him. Henry carefully went over Jessica's medication plan, food restrictions, and how important it was for her to rest for the next 30 minutes. He spoke slowly and clearly so Jessica could understand everything. Henry stressed, don't lift anything for at least 6 weeks. And please call me right away if you feel any strange pain or discomfort. Jessica heard carefully and nodded to show that she understood. She grabbed Henry's hand and squeezed it when he was done. Thank you for everything, Dr. Hart. Henry could feel a lump in his throat. He quickly got rid of it and stood up, adding, I've also set up some extra help, he said. Have a home health nurse check on you twice a week, and I'll bring you meals for the first month. Jessica's eyes got really big in shock. Dr. Hart, that's too much. I can't pay for. Henry stopped her by putting up his hand. Don't worry, Jessica, I'll take care of it. Now, you need to work on getting better. Jessica's eyes got teary. I'm not sure what to say. There's no need to talk, Henry said, in a soft voice. Just feel better. As soon as the nurse came in with a wheelchair, Henry helped Jessica get into it. He felt proud of himself and humble as he watched her be wheeled out of the room. He knew Jessica had a long way to go before she was better, but he was determined to be there for her the whole way. She smiled at Henry as she sat in her wheelchair and got ready to leave the hospital. Her eyes used to be filled with worry and fear, but now they were filled with thanks and hope. Doctor, she began, Hart, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me. Her voice was soft but steady. Henry could feel a lump in his throat. He didn't think this would make him feel so sad. He tried to keep his cool and said, It's my job, Jessica. Jessica gave a small shake of her head. No, that's not it. Dr. Hart, I've seen how you've changed. I didn't feel like I was seen when I first came to your office. But now, I feel cared for and seen. When Henry thought about their first meeting, his cheeks turned red with shame. He started to say sorry, but Jessica kept talking. With her eyes fixed on him, she said, I hope you'll treat all your patients with the same care and respect you've shown me. You should give that to everyone who comes through your door. Henry was deeply affected by what she said. He saw that Jessica wasn't just thanking him. She was also pushing him to achieve more. The promise was made in a heavy voice. I will, Jessica. I promise to do it. She put her hand out and squeezed his. Then you'll be the great doctor I know you are. As the nurse started to wheel Jessica away, Henry felt a big change inside him. His promise to change was strengthened by Jessica's words. Not just for her, but for all of his future patients as well. Even though he knew it would be hard, he was determined to keep the promise Jessica had made to him. As Henry got home that night, the events of the day were still fresh in his thoughts. When he walked through the front door, Stella and Rose were there to meet him with smiles. They were very excited to hear that Jessica had been released. Dad, how did it go? Em asked, her eyes shining with excitement. Henry took a big breath and went into the living room to be with his family. Everything went well, he started, and his voice was full of different feelings. Grace's healing has been amazing. She is strong in mind and body. Stella put her hand on her husband's and felt like there was more to the story. But it's not just about her getting better physically, Henry said, his voice getting softer. Today, Jessica taught me something important. That's how she said it. Thank you, but be better. Rose leaned forward and looked serious. Dad, what do you mean? Henry was proud of how caring his daughter was as he looked at her. She reminded me how important it is to treat every patient with respect and dignity, no matter who they are or where they're from. Rose smiled big on her face. In fact, That's what I've been meaning to say, Dad. It makes me proud that you paid attention and learned. Henry could feel a lump in his throat. I agree with you, Rose. I also want you to know that I appreciate the impact you, your mother, Jessica, and Cynthia have had on my life. All of you have changed the way I see things. A woman named Stella put her arm around her husband's shoulders. Henry, we're here to help you. It's not easy to change, but it's worth it. Rose gave an excited nod. Certainly. Don't forget, Dad, that being kind and caring isn't just for rare cases. They should always be for everyone. Henry looked at his daughter and was amazed at how smart she was for her age. Yes, Rose, you're exactly right. I've learned a lot from all of you. I promise to use what I've learned every day with every patient I see. While his family continued to talk, Henry felt a deep sense of thanks. He understood that his change wasn't just about becoming a better doctor, but also about becoming a better person. He was able to make this happen with the help of the wonderful women in his life. Henry felt like he had a new purpose when he woke up the next morning. He had the feeling that he needed to do more as he got ready for work. The things he learned from Jessica's case and the backing of his family had given him a spark. As Henry made his rounds at the hospital in the morning, he noticed that he was seeing his patients in a new way. He saw past their illnesses and understood that everyone had a different story and set of problems. This new point of view made him feel very sad, especially when he saw patients who were clearly having a hard time paying for their medical care. In the evening, Henry made a choice in his office that would change the course of his work. He called for a quick meeting of the staff on the phone. When Henry's co-workers got together in the meeting room, they were shocked by how determined he looked. He took a deep breath, stood at the head of the table, and spoke. Henry spoke in a clear, steady voice. I've called you all here today because I have an idea. I want to open a clinic in a part of our city that doesn't get enough medical care, so that people who can't pay for it can get it for free. A soft hum could be heard all over the room. Dr. Thompson, one of the more experienced doctors, said with a raised eyebrow, Henry, this is strange. What made this happen? Henry gave a small smile. Recent events have shown me how hard it really is for many people to get health care. We can make a change because we have the skills and tools to do so. I think it's our job to do that. Henry could see the surprise on his co-workers' faces slowly change to excitement as he talked about his plans for the clinic. A young doctor named Dr. Chen was the first person to speak up. She told him, I think it's a great idea. It would be an honor to help out at the clinic for free. As more doctors and nurses spoke up, it became clear that they agreed. Some people offered to help with planning, and others offered their medical knowledge. Henry felt warm all over when he realized that his coworkers were not only shocked by his choice, but also motivated by it. Dr. Thompson stood up. At first, he seemed doubtful. Henry, I have to say, I didn't think you'd do this, but I'm pleased by your initiative. Count me in. Hearing about Henry's new project spread quickly, and soon, he was getting texts from doctors all over the city. Many were moved by his goal of treating everyone with kindness, no matter where they came from. Henry understood he had to carefully choose a team that shared his new commitment and values. Henry sat in his office on a sunny afternoon and read through a lot of job applications and resumes. He wanted to make sure that everyone he hired really knew how important it was to treat every patient with respect and honor. His thoughts were cut off by a knock on the door. He called out, "Come in." A well-known and respected doctor, Dr. Mary Sands, walked into the room. "What's up, Dr. Hart? I heard about your clinic plan. I'd like to offer my help for free," she said, her eyes beaming with joy. Henry gave a warm smile. "That's great, Dr. Sanchez. Take a seat. Feel free to tell me more about why you want to join us." Henry was moved by Mary's desire to help kids who don't have much. As they talked, she talked about what it was like to grow up in a poor area, and how those memories made her want to help others. Henry put out his hand and said, "Your dedication is exactly what we need. Dr. Sanchez, welcome aboard." Over the next few weeks, Henry kept meeting with people who might want to join the team. He was looking for nurses, techs, and office workers who really cared about giving sensitive care. Henry had a meeting with Jake, a young nurse, who had a nice smile and beautiful eyes. Jake said, "I've always thought that everyone should be able to get health care. I had to join your clinic as soon as I heard about it." Henry gave a thumbs up sign. "Yes, Jake, that's the way we should act. Please tell me about a time when you went the extra mile for a patient." During Jake's moving story about how he comforted a sick child during a hard surgery, Henry felt proud. He was putting together a group of people who really wanted to help people. This was the day of the clinic's grand opening. Henry was both excited and worried as he stood in front of the freshly painted building. In the morning sun, the new paint sparkled, and a bright sign over the door welcomed everyone who needed care. Henry was shocked to see a line of people waiting when the doors opened. People from all walks of life stood calmly, with hope in their eyes. There were families with young children, elderly couples, helping each other, and people from all walks of life. "Good morning, everyone," Henry said, with a smile. "Good to see you at our office. We're here to help you." The first person to come in was an old woman with a friendly, wrinkled face. She walked up to Henry with a shaking hand. She said in a soft voice, "Thank you, doctor. I put off getting my heart checked for months because I didn't have the money." Henry gave her a soft pat on the hand. "Ma'am, you're in the right place now. We'll look after you well." As the day went on, Henry and his team worked hard to take care of all the patients. They helped people with everything from colds to more serious illnesses. And they always took the time to listen and be kind. Henry went outside for some fresh air during his short lunch break. He was moved to tears when he saw that people were still waiting to be seen. He didn't feel scared. Instead, he felt proud and determined. He told himself, "We're really making a difference. This is how healthcare should work." When Henry went back inside, he saw Dr. Sanchez soothing a crying child while Jake quickly put together patient files. The commitment and teamwork he saw made him feel thankful. With the day coming to an end, Henry was tired, but very happy. He had handled dozens of patients himself, and each one made him more determined to make healthcare fair for everyone. A familiar face showed up at the front desk right before it closed. Jessica was there with Cynthia's hand. As Henry walked up to them, his heart swelled with feeling. Olivia smiled and said, "Dr. Hart, we were eager to visit the clinic for ourselves. I think what you're doing here is truly amazing." Henry responded, "Thank you, Jessica," with a lump in his throat. "It means a lot to hear that from you." Henry was moved to tears as Jessica and Cynthia stood in front of him. Jessica's eyes sparkled with happiness and thanks, which was very different from the hurt look he remembered from the first time they met. Cynthia looked up at Henry with awe as she held her mother's hand. She said, "Dr. Hart," in a soft but strong voice. "We wanted to come thank you in person. Thanks for everything you've done for us, not just the center." Henry forced a lump to form in his throat as he swallowed hard. I don't know what to say to Jessica." A soft Jessica said, "You don't need to thank me. I should really be thanking you. Dr. Hart, you saved my life and have changed a lot of people's lives with this center." In the busy waiting room, she said, "Look around you. Because of you, these people now have hope." Henry looked around and saw that patients were being treated with respect and honor. He saw smiles where there had been fear or gives up before. The truth of how much of an effect he was having hit him hard. Cynthia pulled on Henry's coat, which caught his eye. She looked into his eyes and said, "Dr. Hart, you're a real hero." Being filled with awe, "You helped my mom get better. And now you're helping these other people too." With tears in his eyes, Henry got down on his knees next to Cynthia. "Cynthia, your mom is the real hero. That no matter who they are or where they come from, Everyone deserves kindness and care. That was one of the most important things I ever learned. Henry spoke to both Jessica and Cynthia while standing up. I appreciate your visit very much. It helps me remember why we're doing this and how important it is. She put her hand on Henry's and squeezed it. Dr. Hart, you've become the doctor and person you were always meant to be. Don't forget that. Henry felt very thankful, and like his life had a meaning, as he watched Jessica and Cynthia leave the clinic. Their visit made me realize how important kindness is in life and in healthcare. He went back to the waiting room, ready to get back to work with more energy and focus. It had been years since Jessica and Cynthia went to see Henry at his office. Now, a warm summer night, the school hall was packed, with happy families there to celebrate Cynthia's graduation. Henry watched Cynthia grow up in front of the crowd, and his heart swelled with joy. Henry couldn't breathe as the principal announced the guest speaker. Jessica was the one who took the stage. She looked beautiful and healthy. Before she started to speak, she looked around the room and briefly met Henry's eyes. Jessica began, "Good evening, everyone." Her voice was clear and strong. "I not only speak as Cynthia's mother today, but also as someone who has seen the power of kindness and compassion in our world." She stopped and took a deep breath. "My health got so bad a few years ago that it almost killed me. I was scared by myself and didn't see any way out. After that, though, a miracle happened. A doctor who had turned me down before changed his mind." Jessica went on, and Henry could feel tears coming to his eyes. "Dr. Henry Hart and his staff saved my life, but they also taught me what it means to care about others. They taught me that a kind word or deed can make all the difference in the world." Jessica's voice got more emotional as she spoke to the finishing class. "Remember this as you start your journey through life. Empathy can change lives. It can help people get along, heal scars, and make the world a better place for everyone." Jessica talked about the center Henry had opened and the people whose lives it had changed. This made Henry feel very sad. He thought about the person he used to be, and was amazed at how far he had come. Jessica continued, as she looked back at Henry in the crowd. "Dr. Hart's transformation shows that it's never too late to change and become a better version of ourselves. His care not only saved my life, but it started a movement of kindness that still affects many lives today." Henry was deeply moved by what Jessica said. He was thankful for the path that led him to this point, and the people who had taught him what kindness really meant. When Jessica finished her speech, there was a lot of applause in the room. Henry wiped a tear from his eye. He felt very sad. He looked over at Rose, who was sitting next to him, and saw that Jessica's words had done the same thing to her. Even though the graduates' families were still talking to each other and congratulating them, Rose looked at her dad with determination in her eyes. She told her dad, "I've made up my mind," her voice full of determination. Henry took a close look at his daughter. "What is it, sweetheart?" Rose sat up straight and took a deep breath. "I want to become a doctor like you. I want to make a change in people's lives and help them." Henry's eyes got big with surprise, and then he smiled with pride. He looked into Rose's eyes while putting his hands on her shoulders. It was clear in his speech that he was feeling very happy for Rose. "You've done great." Rose's eyes were shining with joy. "This has been on my mind for a while. I'm impressed by how much you've changed and how much you've helped Jessica and everyone else at the center. The same thing I want to do." Henry gave his daughter a tight hug. He felt love and pride as he held her. When they broke apart, he fixed his eyes on Rose. Henry told Rose, "I promise you I'll be there for you every step of the way. I'll make sure you have everything you need to have the kind of doctor who really cares about her patients and treats them with kindness and honesty." Rose smiled when her dad spoke. "Thanks, Dad. I want to be a doctor who sees people for who they are, not just their history or symptoms. Like you, I want to make a real difference." Henry was so proud that his heart swelled. He understood that his journey of change had not only changed him, but also encouraged his daughter to follow a path of kindness and service. It had been years since that terrible graduation day. As his daughter, Dr. Rose Hart, cared for a patient, Dr. Henry Hart stood in the busy clinic he had started and watched with pleasure. The small exam room was filled with kindness and warmth, which was very different from Henry's old office, which was cold and germ-filled. When Rose was done with her patient, an old woman with a nice smile, Henry went up to her. "How is Mrs. Johnson?" he asked in a caring tone of voice. Rose gave her dad a big smile. "She is doing a lot better. The doctor has taken care of her blood pressure, and she is perfectly following her treatment plan." Henry nodded, and a pleasant feeling filled him. He looked around the office and noticed the different kinds of people who were waiting to be seen. People from all walks of life sat next to each other and were treated with the same amount of care and respect. Henry felt a wave of feeling as they walked to the next exam room together. He stopped and put his hand on Rose's shoulder. He said softly, "You know, Rose, I've learned a lot since we opened this clinic. But the most important thing I've learned is that real healing comes from the heart." She smiled at her dad because she knew what he was saying was important. "Yes, Dad. Every day you teach me that." It was cloudy in Henry's eyes as he looked around the office. This building was no longer just a medical center. It was a sign of his redemption and a promise to serve everyone without any barriers. As they went into the next room to see their patient, Henry felt very thankful. He had come a long way from being a racist doctor. Now that he worked with his daughter, he was live proof that things could change. Not only for the people it helped, but also for anyone who believed in the power of kindness and the chance to grow as a person. The center was a bright light. What if you were Jessica? Would you have forgiven Dr. Henry Hart? Do you say yes or no? Write your answer in the box below. I'd love to hear your point of view. Also, please follow my channel if you liked the video. I spend a lot of time writing these touching stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going.